This week at TECHquila Sunrise, we're smoking and drinking. Yeah, we're doing our first founder interview, and it's a hot one. A cannabis industry supply chain tech leader. I'm taking a step towards the dark side. Yeah, I'll tell you about my newest gig and tell you why, if you're a founder, you might just be as excited as I am. I'm also going to highlight one big mover in the supply chain tech stock index. So listen up. It's time to wake up to TECHquila Sunrise, where unfortunately, without the aid of tequila, we open your eyes to how startups and venture investing techs focused on supply chain tech every week at this unholy hour of the day. If you want a taste of how tech startup growth and investment is done, join me every Thursday for another blinding TECHquila Sunrise. Greg White here from Supply Chain Now. I am always happy, never satisfied, willing to acknowledge reality, but refusing to be bound by it. My goal is to inform, enlighten, and inspire you in your own supply chain tech journey. Hey, in case you're listening in the Supply Chain Now main channel, you should know you need to subscribe to TECHquila Sunrise wherever you get your podcasts. We'll only be in the mainstream for a couple weeks more. Go subscribe to TECHquila Sunrise today so you don't miss a thing. Hey, you may have heard me mention Balaji Gopinath at Kubera Venture Capital in episode 5. Remember Paul Noble, CEO at Verison, introduced us? And Balaji and I really hit it off over a couple of cold beers, talking about what we thought could be improved in the investment ecosystem for founders. Balaji shared Kubera's visionary, founder-empowering investment philosophy, and I found it a really refreshing approach as a founder. Fast forward a bit, and when Balaji and James McKee and Saint Azorlu asked me to join as a venture partner, I had to say yes. So let me tell you why. Kubera invests in early stage companies, seed stage, and A rounds, early company success. We're consultative investors for founders who are reimagining how we work and we live, who are building emerging technologies for future of work, Industry 4.0, and now, after a couple of cold beers, supply chain. A lot of founders have reached out to me to share their ideas, their companies, and their woes. And I really look forward to talking to you if you need guidance, or if you're considering a fundraise and you're an early stage company, reach out to me directly at greg@kubera.vc. That's KUBERA.vc. All right, I'm pretty excited to get you to our guest for this week. But first, let's see what's going on in supply chain tech this week. Hey, money seems to be slowly coming out of hibernation. And let me tell you about one investor. Cambridge Capital, Ben Gordon, who I've mentioned on the show and will be a guest in future weeks, has already made 3 supply chain deals this year. 2 in tech, Lift It, which we talked about a few weeks ago, and Bring, that closed in April on $30 million in funding, somewhere under $500 million in valuation. So there is money in the market. Buck up, little campers. There's a big opportunity out there. All right, let's talk about this week. 264 funding rounds for $7.3 billion, 97 acquisitions for $12.5 billion. And this week, I dug into supply chain deals. There were 10 rounds for $97.5 million. All right, let's jump to the TECHquila Sunrise Supply Chain Tech Stock Index, because it is so easy to say. It is easy to say that not much happened this week. Look, nearly every stock is flat to up a little this week. As of Tuesday's close, PTC, Park City Group down slightly. SAP is near its 52-week high that it hit on Tuesday. And get this, Big Commerce, new member of the index, jumped $28 when it announced its Instagram integrations to over 104. There are some great and interesting deals happening this week. I'll go into some detail next week, and I'll include them in the show notes at supplychainnowradio.com/tequila-sunrise. But we have a special episode today, so let's roll right into that and get ready for a little bit of transition from smooth jazz voice to Zoom voice. Hey, it's time to bring in our guest. Colton Griffin, CEO, Flourish, one of the leaders in the cannabis industry. Let me tell you a little bit about Colton. He's a supply chain veteran, graduated magna cum laude with industrial engineering from the University of Tennessee. Get this, has Bechtel, Schlumberger, Genuine Parts, which is Napa, and Manhattan Associates in his experience. And he stumbled into the cannabis industry by pivoting a prior company to create this industry-leading, I would argue, track and trace company. So let me make one full disclosure. I'm really honored to serve on the board of directors of Flourish. So I might be a pretty big fan, but what I'm really excited about is today I get to ask Colton a bunch of questions that I have never really gotten to ask him before as a board member. So before we get started, do you have your shot glass?
I do.
All right. Bottoms up. Okay.
Get this thing started.
Let's get this party started. Look, you and I have known each other for a while now, but our listeners don't know you. And on TECHquila Sunrise, I want people to get to know you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your hometown, a little bit about your childhood, and maybe what type of kid you were. I have a feeling I know, but.
Love it. Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. So I grew up in rural East Tennessee, between Knoxville and Chattanooga, and definitely have an appreciation for the outdoors and country life. I actually went to boarding school in Chattanooga and got a scholarship and went there, and left home at 14 to go to prep school, which was a world of difference from where I grew up, and a great experience. And then I went to the University of Tennessee, studied industrial engineering there, and then wound up in Atlanta at Manhattan to really kick off the career.
Any aunts, uncles, grandparents, anybody impart any significant wisdom on you, or was there kind of a pivotal moment that you can recall from your childhood?
I think my parents raised me right. I had a good foundation as far as morals and discipline and hard work. And then, when I would say when I was in high school, I had a bunch of really amazing mentors, a couple, teachers who were just really well educated and had great world views. And, I was an Eagle Scout. At the end of the day, I went through Boy Scouts for 4 years, had a great Scoutmaster. We were very active in the camping. I did something like every month, chopped firewood all winter, raised money. So there was a good number of influencers. I remember one person from before I was in high school, I wrote a bio on, had a really kind of successful career, ended up in AT&T, but earlier in his career, he had hitchhiked across the country by himself. He grew up in the poor West Virginia, and hitchhiked across the country at 16. And then, when I knew him, I used to do a lot of yard work for him. He had a huge house, and had a kind of successful career behind him. But it was kind of interesting writing a bio on someone like that varied background.
Interesting. That reminds me of a friend of mine who did a similar thing. He's about 6'7", and he drove a Volkswagen Bug across America, kind of doing the same thing, couch hopping, and then settled down, I guess, sowed his wild oats and settled down and started a business. And he's uber successful now. That's really interesting. I've always told people I feel like I wasted my youth not getting wasted. Maybe I should have done that more. So. So let me ask you about some of the things you like. You got a favorite topic, or are you a fan of anything big? What's your favorite hobby?
I used to be super involved in politics, which was my sort of passion when I was doing the corporate job at GPC. I had a lot more free time than I have now. I've dialed some of that back. Politics is even more divisive than it was 5 years ago or 7 years ago. So,
yeah, if that was even possible, right? Yeah.
It's but I do love to read and love to keep up with how things are made. It's been kind of neat seeing it from the inside and from the out. Had a long activist background from when I was I grew up with the internet, right? So as soon as I had access to understand what everything is going on in the world, it's like, does no one care about this? Let's sign all these online petitions. I'm 13, 14 years old. Suddenly all that, the world was right there. So that's
pretty cool. So that's your hobby is.
Yeah. I'm not a sports nut. Not that I don't like going to the games and having fun. I just haven't ever ever latched onto a specific team. I mean, go Vols. I enjoyed football while I was there, and it's fun to go back for a game. And, other than that, now it's nice to get away from technology some and just, visit the great outdoors. During COVID, it's even that's all we got. So definitely been enjoying some outdoor activities this summer and spring.
So you're in Cali, right? So you're close to the beach?
I'm like a block from the beach. I can almost throw the Frisbee and hit it. So yeah, trying to learn some surfing, a good biking, running right here. It's I'm in Venice, which is a pretty cool town. It's a neat, on the west side of LA here.
Yeah. Have you hit the weights on the beach, or did they? I think they took those away, didn't they?
All the gyms are closed, including the outdoor gym. So Muscle Beach. Cool.
Yeah, that's right. Muscle Beach, Venice. Yeah, that's a cool area out there. But you lived in Atlanta before you moved out there, right? So
Manhattan. 8 good years in Atlanta. Really loved my time there, and a couple good years at Manhattan, and then a couple of good years at Genuine Parts, building out all their analytics and deploying that across the country. And then, we did some consulting and continue to work with them, past being a full-time employee there. And really love Atlanta. I think it's even more on the radar than it was when I first moved there. But I was a big advocate selling it. We still have the office there. It's our official HQ. A lot of our team is in Atlanta.
Yeah. Nice digs too, by the way. Okay, so first gotcha question is, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word? My favorite word obviously is flourish.
Wow. Your marketing people have tuned you up, man. That's
it's a hard one, but yeah, I don't know if I've ever thought about that question.
Yeah, that's a toughie, isn't it? If you come back, it's okay if you come back to it later.
Okay.
It's flourish too.
First is a good one. I feel like we landed on a name that spoke a lot about what we're trying to observe and empower. And
I mean, for the cannabis industry, it's a double entendre, right? I mean, so I love it. The plants flourish, and the companies flourish.
We were very close to naming the company Leafy, and then we Googled it and realized there was already a big company in the space called Leafly, which would have been very confusing. And obviously we do a lot more than cultivation now than when that was the first product or piece of the product we launched. So I was glad we landed here. It's much better.
Yeah, it's good. Great looking shirt too, by the way, one of my favorites. So thank you for that as well.
Rep the brand.
So aside from your childhood, maybe at Manhattan, maybe in college or whatever, any mentors or any pivotal moments? I mean, anyone who kind of helped you become who you are today or have that sort of epiphanal moment or anything like that?
Gosh, it's been like a series of good mentors as I transitioned both geographies and stages in the career. At Manhattan, I think I was like lucky to have management that was pretty supportive, and I did a lot of self-study and pushed myself to learn things like a little bit past my job role, but my management there and VP there were supportive of, doing innovation and, allowing us to experiment and fail if we needed to, even if we weren't billing the clients for it. So that was good. And in GBC, it was a bit more of an island and a very large corporate enterprise. So, I had a good manager there who also, I think, just respected that the work was getting done and was great to work with. I think our board here has been really impactful, including you and Tom and Micah have been really, really, I didn't appreciate what a board was until we put it together, a little over a year ago. And sounding that off in a structured way has been really, really helpful over the last year and getting some clarity on taking this company to the next stage.
I think that's really good. That's a really good observation for other founders, right? Is if you construct your board the right way, it's as much mentorship as it is guidance and oversight, right? I mean, it's somebody you can bounce things off of, and I think a lot of people, a lot of founders, I know a lot of founders see it as kind of an obligation, kind of those pain in the asses in suits that you have to report to every month or quarter or whatever, right? But it's a lot more than that if you construct it right.
You started the business to not have a boss, then suddenly you realize you have a lot of bosses.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's definitely, I think it's a huge advantage if you do it right, because especially if you bring people in that have done it or observed it before, it's key. It's how we learn.
It is. And I think it's a joy for us. Mike has done it. I've done it. And I think it's a joy for us to be able to help you get beyond those things, those dumb things we did. We can hear them coming a mile away and help you understand, hey, if you do this, here's the consequence of that, or here's the upside of that. Or if you do this, do it that way. I think that becomes really powerful. At least I hope it is. But yeah, I think if you have, and you've done a great job of constructing a board that has knowledge of finance, of supply chain, of the industry, of the big players in the industry. Tom, of course, coming from Oracle.
Yeah.
And you've got a great diversity there, plus a couple of your co-founders on the board with you. So you get a lot of inside and outside purview there. So that's well done from that standpoint. So, okay. So I wasn't really sure how to ask this question, but what I've seen with really, really successful founders and particularly people who found and lead companies, is often they have a trait you might consider a dysfunction, but somehow they make it work for them. So do you recognize that? Do you have something you think could be objectively considered a dysfunction, obsessive compulsive or whatever, that you have actually harnessed and used to make you more successful?
The ability to never turn it off. So
you're a workaholic.
So, which is something I've worked for like several years to keep in balance. But when I look back at, the crazy amount of hours, not just me, but also my co-founders put in, some of the early stages of this. And it took us a while to get to where we are now. And we went through sort of a year and sort of a challenging business relationship and spun out and spent a year in the wilderness trying to get our first product launched and learned a ton in that process.
Yeah.
And even our first year with Flourish here was pretty, there was a lot more reasons why we should have failed than not. But, I look back at just the insane amount of time and I'm very fortunate I can sit down and generally stay focused for hours on end without even looking up and being distracted. It's like the opposite of ADD. Yeah. And that's always been good. Even if there's noise and stuff around, it's just there. So that's,
so once you're dialed in, you are dialed.
Usually, yeah. That's getting in the flow, getting in the zone, and then you're just there to a fault to some degree. So it has to be balanced out if you want some personal life, which I do have and I'm happy to have. But that I think from a founder perspective, you have to learn those lessons along the way.
Yeah, well, I can see that you've got. I can see from observation that you've definitely got the ability to lock in. I've watched you produce things we've talked about in relatively short order. So I get that. And that's really powerful. I don't know what you call that. I don't know if you call that obsessive compulsive or whatever, but, and by the way, I'd like to float a concept past you. So I think it's incredibly ironic to call it obsessive compulsive disorder when most of the time obsessive compulsiveness is about order. So don't you think we should call it obsessive compulsive order? What do you think? Yeah.
I'm gonna agree with you on that one. Yeah, I think also the ability to have imminent failure like immediately in front of you, for sometimes weeks on end, and then conveniently just being able to shut that off and ignore it and stay focused on what you need to do to get done is also, I don't know what, I look back sometimes and I'm like, why wasn't I just sitting in my room crying at this point? Because it's like, are you just insane? You have no emotion to process like how bad that is, but like from just a risk perspective, but you have to be able to compartmentalize that off, which is, I think, a strength.
I think that is really a strength. It's absolute necessity, in my opinion, for a founder to do that. I think that when we look at society, a lot of the great people had what you could arguably call a dysfunction, but in truth, they turned that dysfunction into something productive. So it just becomes a function at that point. So you brought it up, so I have to ask. I know it's probably tough right now with what's going on with COVID and everything, but what do you do in your personal life? I mean, tell us a little bit about a day in the life outside the office for Colton.
Outside the office, so getting in some beach time, doing some very casual bike riding. Not a biker. I don't think I can. I don't have spandex on yet. I definitely working in some hikes. I mean, fortunate to have a really good social like friend group here and around the country, and so. A lot of going to the bars and going out, although none of that is happening anymore. So now it's, having people over, like maybe out to the beach or, over the house. I mean, I try to disconnect in a meaningful way regularly. During the work week is pretty focused on work, but the normal stuff, just trying to get out and, I mean, hopefully my escape from work is more than walking to Starbucks, getting a coffee and back. So you need a little bit more than that. But yeah, I enjoy just hanging out with friends.
So are you off when you're off? I mean, do you tune out, dial out for at least a few hours a day, or?
I would say a few hours a day. I would say, maybe 1 to 2 hours a day. I really do like getting in the gym. I feel like that's a habit I've built more consistently over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Of course, all those are closed as well now. So I've taken up running, which I don't love, but it is actually, the more you do it, the more you learn to love it. Yeah. And when I do take vacation, I do more, like I move all the apps off the first screen and turn off all the notifications and set that office. And, you can always get in touch. Good. You have to do it at that level because otherwise it's constant checking, constant pinging. So, I mean, I actually try to tell everybody on the team to do something similar if they can. If you're going to disconnect, you need to disconnect.
Really do it.
Reset periods are super important, to be focused when you need to be focused.
Yeah, you've got to re-energize at some point, right? That's really good. So you turn off notifications and
move the apps into the back folder of the phone, the iPhone. Yeah.
Wow, that is brilliant. I had not thought of that. Yeah.
Because your email's right in front of you. Otherwise, it's
you just hit it.
It's habit. You can't even, you want to try to even reduce Facebook use. I experimented moving Facebook app off the screen and see if that actually would help me stop, checking, these apps, because it's just right there. You pick it up all day long and you don't know how many times do you really check your email 500 times a day? Probably. So.
Might. Yeah, I bet there are people who do. I mean, if you follow a Twitter feed, man, you got to wonder, what else are some people doing? I don't know how they can do it. I find it really cumbersome to do it, but I'm probably more like you. I'm a very inertial, right? When I'm on, I'm 100% on. When I'm off, I'm more than 100% off, right? So it sounds like you do kind of a similar thing. Not many hours off, but if they're good hours off, it's energizing.
It counts. And if you love what you're doing, then it's, when you're working, it's not grueling. So,
yeah. So you mentioned a little while back, you mentioned some of the challenges that you had seen, and maybe some of the challenges that COVID or that the things going on in the cannabis industry now. I don't know what might have challenged you, but this is a question I've heard asked, and I love it. So I think people learn a lot when they take when they hear from somebody who's been successful like you, and they hear about a moment that, was kind of pivotal for somebody. It was go cry in your room, or it was, give up on your goals, or it was feel crushed by something that's happened to you. Can you tell us about maybe a moment like that and how you handled that? How did you come through it?
There's so many.
Really?
Right.
I mean, like you said, you kind of detach from it. So, I mean, arguably, some of these could crush a particular person frequently, weekly, daily, even. I don't know.
Yeah, especially, getting a company launched, you're just going to hit lots of failures or mistakes, and things just sometimes don't work. And, you have to stay focused on the bigger goal and not let it completely consume you. The first day of vacation this year, in the beginning of the year, we had a big client that we thought was going to churn, and that was going to be really impactful and screw up a lot of projections and a lot of kind of our fundraising story. And it was just it probably couldn't have I couldn't have come up with something that would have been worse for us to get through. And
right around Christmas time too, right?
Right around
just
Christmas
after. Yeah.
Right. Literally the first day I planned to take off 4 days, so it's something that's just, you can set it aside. There's really nothing you can do about it at that point, over the holidays, and kind of consume you, and so when you ultimately, though, we just put together a strategy and then 3 backup plans, made some quick decisions, went through, I think, a really structured campaign to turn things around, worried that something was going to go off the rails, and trying to dig deeper and understand really where that was coming from and maybe why we didn't see it in the first place, or, what was really happening. At the end of the day, it came out much stronger, and we saved what we needed to save, and we affirmed, I think even a better commitment, a better position than we are now, and solidified things that needed to be discussed and had conveniently been, kicked along and not been addressed. And so, there was definitely moments where it was the oh shit plan was really, really bad
yeah.
and really real. And, I would say probabilities, if you just had to pick numbers, was that was the 70% likelihood of where it was going, right? But that
was the pull the ripcord and jump, bail, right?
Just
not in that order.
Hopefully not. Yeah. So I think that was a huge challenge, for us, where we put a lot of work into something and thought it was all going to fall apart, and really turn a lot of things upside down. And a known risk that, became realized, and then ultimately, though, was mitigated and turned around into something that's actually a lot more positive. So I would say that even, if you think you staked everything to one element of the business, and, it's so core, and, it's something you kind of bust your ass over multiple years to make happen, and you think it's all going to fall apart, maybe you also need to take some blinders off and realize that what you build is bigger than one piece of it. And, if you get focused on the fundamentals, you can turn that around, and, it works itself out.
Is that the big lesson, you think? I mean, recognize when you've got too many eggs in one basket. And
exactly. And also, you can't, I think in relationships, internal and external with your customers, you can't take things for granted. It's important to document, over communicate. It's important to set structure up around that. So, you think about we've had, 1 or 2 really good people that ultimately left for better opportunities. And you think maybe, those, if you put those strategies in, early, that retention starts way beyond, or way before, there's a flag for internal use. And then for customers and, and partners and that sort of thing, even if everything is roses and going really well, it doesn't mean you can take those relationships for granted. You still have to it's constant work to keep them up. And diversification is important as well. It's always nice to have those plans ready so that, you can execute them when you need to. If you think about in the business, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen, and then plan for it, when it does, or if it gets even close to it, you'll be ready to turn it around.
That's really poignant there.
Oh.
A great athletic coach, swim coach, once said to me, I can tell you with one question who my greats are going to be on my team. And that question is, do you love to win or do you hate to lose? And he said, universally, the greats hate to lose, because with that mindset, you consider what it is that makes you lose and you work hard to eliminate any possibility that you could lose. And by eliminating the possibilities of losing, you win. And they sort of consider winning the job, these greats, right? And recognizing that, knowing what could go wrong, that's a critical thing. And it's really hard to do as a founder, isn't it? I mean, you want to think everything is roses and daffodils, right? That it's all going to go so well. But you do have to consider the downside risk. Yeah, that's a great lesson, man.
There's a lot of pieces to making the whole organization work, and early stage or as you're growing larger, they all have to be there. You can't function without these. So taking each one and figuring out what would happen if you ripped it out, and how do you mitigate that is it's like a constant exercise, and then but it's you learn some of those lessons along the way. So everyone has missteps and things fall through that you thought were sure things, but at the end of the day, like if you got the right team in place and the right foundation, it transcends that.
So what I think, this is my observation on that particular topic, which we can't go into a lot of detail on, but what I think you've really exhibited here is your desire or need or ability to own it, even when it's beyond your control, because the specific situation that you're talking about, there's no way you could have had an impact. And the strategic or political conditions that put that situation in play were well beyond even your most powerful advocates' area of influence within that company. So I appreciate that you own it. I'm going to tell you, take it easy on yourself a little bit, because maybe there was some aspect of taking the relationship for granted a little bit. But the truth is, the pivotal moment was well out of your control. And in the end, it took resolving that particular pivotal condition to really save it, to save both your customer, I believe, and the relationship between Flourish and the customer. So,
and we work in an emerging industry in a very chaotic landscape where there's a lot of things, in our customer base and in our day-to-day that are not in our control. And that's both for clients as well as for us, right? Like, who knows, a regulatory change happens overnight and then suddenly, people's business models are flipped on their head, right? So I think, that's one of the big things around this industry is like, you have to be super, you have to recognize that you have control over certain things, and then things you don't. You have to just be able to roll with the punches, because they're often, I've had prospects that were ready to sign and the freaking facility burns down the day before, the week before we get the contract executed, or, somebody, gets raided and something's shut down, or, the permit that, everyone was expecting to happen gets, rescheduled for 2 city council meetings, away because of a permit landscaping issue. It's like, or an inspector that needs, something to happen. There's just like so many things in this industry that, or like, a business that everyone thought was like, doing well suddenly completely collapsed because it was all smoke and mirrors at the end of the day. And suddenly someone's holding the bag and with, product or accounts receivable, that's like not going to happen. I mean, it's like just it's a very Wild West, fast moving environment with folks that kind of run the very full spectrum of what you can imagine. And, like you have to be very comfortable in that position here.
You have to be in control even when things are out of control.
Exactly.
Right. This leads me to you created a beautiful segue, because I really have wanted to ask you this. What in the name of God ever inspired you to found Flourish? I mean, you had a perfectly good, I think, right? Good business with WM Site, which was the company you kind of pivoted to become Flourish.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you had kind of an interesting experience in that caused you to do that. So can you share that with us? I mean, why this crazy cannabis industry, right? And why this, this particular angle on it?
So, traditional supply chain, the consulting was great money. I mean, much better money than some of the cannabis money we make. Enterprise IT consulting, this is incredibly lucrative.
Yeah.
And we, the whole reason why we formed WM Site, like originally, was because we kind of got tired of just building the same thing over and over, right? Like reporting, analytics tied to your warehousing operations or fulfillment. After you've done it for 100 clients, like it's kind of like, do we really need, to
start from scratch?
$1,000 in consulting fees to build the same thing we built for the last 5 people. Yeah. So like we wanted to productize that, but we realized that, what we were doing it wasn't a nice to have, it was a need to have, but it wasn't as execution driven as we wanted. So we spent like almost a year trying to get a pilot like fully deployed, like not just deploying it, but just getting it through the hoops, and realized this enterprise sales cycle was crazy. And, it just like, we didn't start this just to like make some software and make some money. We really wanted to actually do something that meant something. Right. So like, these tools should actually positively affect people's lives and work. I personally have actually really, like, I think back to when I was actually in high school and had all these like plans around like, wow, hemp is so amazing. You can build these products with it. Like, why is it illegal? Like, why don't we use hemp to make clothing and fiber and, and materials and all these like 1,000 products or, to make with it, because it has some arbitrary federal classification that bars it. It's insane. And so I've always loved cannabis and always, had a social justice bent. So when we really just completely accidentally stumbled into this industry and connected with our first client, or who became our first client, we had learned lessons about wanting to know, we wanted to tackle a market. We had a product that was ready to do something with. We had a team that worked really, really well together. We had really good processes in place to get code built and delivered. And we knew supply chain. And so like when this happened, like we looked at the industry and we're like, our competitors don't even track non-cannabis inventory. So you only track part of the inventory in the inventory management system. It was like almost insane to hear the stories. And, and like it was a couple years in to legalization in Colorado and Washington, Oregon, had already legalized. California was like kind of a year out from full legal program being launched. So in LA it was bigger than the entire market. Just LA County was bigger than the entire legal market. It was a year away from opening, and you thought, well, damn, is there just like this massive set of business that's going to, unlock, and the players here, like the software is like, it's really kind of terrible. And,
I think a lot of people don't realize that in certain states, cannabis in Colorado or California and Colorado, particularly, cannabis has been legal for a decade or more.
Yeah.
Right? In some form or fashion. And I don't think all of America, certainly not all of our fellow supply chain professionals, recognize that. So there is actually on-premise technology, old on-premise technology
that's out there. And, the point of sale market was really hot because you have to have a point of sale for retail, but upstream is harder in manufacturing and distribution and cultivation. And, suddenly you started asking and you found that, you knew a lot of people that were in the industry or knew someone that was in the industry. So we got on the phone with all these folks and started asking them questions about, what they're doing. And software was just like this complete nightmare. In cannabis, there's a state track and trace mandate. So you have to document everything in really, specific ways, on the cultivation process, tagging the plants, tagging the inventory, all gets reported up to the state system. The state interface that you deal with provides little to zero business value. It's clunky. It's hard to use. Everyone, it's just forced technology adoption everyone hates. Right. And it's consistent. It hasn't really changed, the over 3 years we've been in the market. So, we just said let's run before we walk. And we worked our code and we started hacking together what ultimately became the platform. Say hacking together, but because we got out here, we toured a facility or two. We had a couple meetings with some guys who walked us through, what it meant to grow, what the stages of cultivation, for instance, right? Just all right. Generic industry, terms and whatnot. And we kind of just went for it. And, our first customer, went completely dark on us for at least a month, which is totally normal in cannabis. So Yikes. For people to just say they're too busy and just not pick up the phone for a month because, why not?
Stuff happens, right?
Stuff happens. But we ultimately, we had two customers, one in California and one in Florida, who were we bounced ideas off both of them, designed this out, and then got it deployed. Then we had a third in Oregon. All three of these customers looked completely different. They did slightly different stuff. They had different backgrounds, teams, SOPs were slightly different. But we were really specific. We didn't want to build, something for one person. We needed to build it for the industry. So we really just kind of clung on, and it was an industry we could get behind. We love, cannabis, both recreational and medical, and then hemp has quickly followed that over the last couple of years. And it's just, it's so exciting to be part of actually making this happen. If you're going to do something, if you're going to put in the hours, you want it to be meaningful. Not that moving boxes through warehouse is not meaningful, because it always is. If you're providing tools for people to grow their business, but it's cool to be working with people that are, they have had a passion for cannabis for all their life, and now are suddenly able to own and operate a business, growing this plant and, getting it, distributed, across the state and, and executing on it. And, they need these tools to run the day to day. And, it provides a little bit more meaning than, some of the other projects I've done over the years.
So there's a couple of dynamics in cannabis that I think it would be interesting for people to understand. One is the strict regulation and tracking of the product, and two, the dynamics of regulation in the industry. The laws change frequently. So can you share a little bit of that with the audience and give them, just maybe some examples or...
Yeah. So we track in cultivation, we tag individual plants as soon as they're kind of large enough to have a tag on them. Of course, every state has decided little nuances that are different. So it's not like we build it once and just deploy it everywhere. We turn on and off different flags, where we deploy it. And then we, record any waste off those plants, and we take in a lot of states, we weigh every single one of those plants and they cut it down. And then it loses 80% approximately of its weight to water. And then we assign, the dried material gets trimmed out and it gets put on a package that we use the term package ID, license plate number, LPN, unique identifier. And then everything in the supply chain comes from somewhere and goes somewhere. So, it's 100% tracked to the barcode that it's assigned to, and it all has a history, and you can go back through the history and look at it. There's very strict testing requirements. So everything has to be sampled, and people spend hundreds of dollars per test to sample, to test things. If your tomatoes were tested to the degree the cannabis are tested, you might not be able to buy all those tomatoes you buy because, it's very faint traces of pesticide that maybe weren't even applied to the plant, but operators have to be aware of, residue maybe in the air around it, or what soil they put on their plants that might have something that accidentally got into it, because those pests are very sensitive. And, the product to get to market has to go through that QA step. And then, so the regulatory requirements are like basically an over-engineered SOP for everything you can think of, documentation for everything that happens, like to the nth degree, and then tracking it. And then there's costs associated with every one of those transactions. And, I've never seen so many people jump backwards to save 25 cents, but, when it's 25 cents a tag, like it is in some states, or 45 cents a tag, and you're doing thousands, a month, it starts to add up. And it's like, wow, you bend over backwards to do that. Or, you have to think about how you separate the inventory, because, if something fails a test, which there's legitimate reasons why it could be failed, and then you have to retest another, $500 maybe to spend, and, and eating into your margins, or you have to destroy something, or you have to reprocess it in a different way. There's just lots. And
plus I've heard stories of laws changing in a single state, which, by the way, that's another dynamic you probably ought to share with the audience, but laws changing in a single state over 100 times in a year. And still,
new paperwork you have to sign, different sign-offs, different requirements on facility things, like camera requirements, security plan requirements. I think in Florida right now, they gave basically everybody 2 weeks. I'm going to say 2 weeks or 4 weeks, very short amount of time, to say that everything had to have a third-party mandated test attached to it to be sold in retail, right? So you're talking, thousands of inventory items across, some people have, some big players have, dozens of stores that suddenly everything has to have a new label on it. Right. And a new SOP has to be, both designed, implemented, and deployed in a matter of weeks. Right. And coordinated with third parties and systems. And these changes, can sometimes happen like that. Okay, we've released guidance, and, now you have to follow this, and you have 14 days before it goes into effect. So now we suddenly have to train 200 people how to do something slightly different, or the product can't be sold in the market. And it happens. Every state has a different set of rules. And then sometimes localities also put additional rules on top of that. And, and basically the legal industry makes good money in this industry. I'll say that. You have to have a good attorney and a good legal team, because you got to interpret it, and packaging. I never would have thought packaging would be so hard, but you screw up packaging, it could be $1 million mistake and sink the whole business. There's no way to take oil out of a vape cart and put it back into another vape cart once you filled 10,000 of them, or re-sticker thousands of boxes by hand. I mean, you hear these nightmares of people something. It's just all these little details that they have to be. Every detail has to be thought of in a really dedicated way. It's a lot. I mean, the operator, there's a lot it takes to get a product to market and then keep it in market.
Sounds overwhelming. So, I know, and of course you can't cross state lines because violates federal rules, and then you go to prison for the rest of your life. And you can't use interstate banking because that is under the purview of the federal government, and then you go to prison. So this has been largely a cash, though it's evolving. It's been largely a cash business. I mean, have you been paid in cash in large sums by customers?
Yes, I have a money counter in the house who to sometimes count. Someone drops off $30,000 in cash, and I mean, it's we fortunately the customers we work with, and most people in the industry are able to get some level of banking. There's just an incredible amount of paperwork that comes with it,
and that's just changed in the last
year or two. And it's getting better and better. Because banks are figuring it's just there's ways to do it. It takes a lot to make it happen, and there's risk and procedure, and frankly, it has to be worth it for the bank. And the fees are crazy, but credit cards are really non-existent. It's one of the biggest and should be most easily solvable problems in this industry. Is just the very small legislative changes that we need to make banking accessible and get billions of dollars in cash out of vaults and safes across the country and into the banking system, so people can just transact and send invoices. And we lost one of our benefits companies who gave us, it was like mid payroll, and they said, sorry, can't run payroll. You're dropped. Right. And how do you're obviously your employees expecting their paycheck. And suddenly you had to, switch a payroll company, in a matter of days, and we're not even a plant fetching company. We have to deal with some of those challenges, but not as much as our customers do.
Right. You don't handle any of the plants, any of the product at all, right? So
no, we don't touch
providing
any of
software to those that do.
Yeah. So, but it's, banking is incredibly challenging. And then if you're a multi-state operator, you're operating under a different set of rules in every state you're working on. You can move your hardware and your packaging, across state lines, but you can't move any of your product across state lines. And it's, and then even in hemp, it's fine to do all the commerce, but like some of the major carriers and stuff won't transport it. There's still barriers. It's not frictionless.
Yeah.
And then like I was at a big hemp customer other week, and they do some parcel, like some stuff that's not on a truck. They ship through USPS sometimes, and like they said, yeah, it's great, it's fine, it's legal. But then when someone doesn't know what it is and then seizes it or holds it for 2 weeks and it sits there and then gives your customer, it's like even if it is completely legal and documented and everything, like people still don't even know how to handle it because there's not consistent guidance everywhere. And these are all solvable problems. Hopefully we'll see some of them be solved in the next year or so.
Well, and taxation is burdensome, to say the least, right? I mean, to me, it just seems like all these states have made this enormous cash grab. So the standard operating procedures and regulatory compliance is unbelievably burdensome and expensive.
Yes.
Right. You don't get economies of scale in the supply chain because you're bounded by the state lines. And you've got an incredible tax burden. I mean, significant, right? I don't know. What is it?
I'm going to say in like up to 40% of that sales price is taxes. I was looking today, every state has a different tax rate. Sometimes there's local taxes on it, and sometimes there's also upstream taxes that you don't see as a consumer. But I think in Colorado, the tax rate right now is like 20%. So, and plus local tax on it sometimes as well. It's a lot. It's crazy.
Well, and part of the problem that produces, at least this is my estimation of it, is in California, you are probably aware that there are a lot of companies that blur the line or even cross the line back and forth between in compliance, being completely legal, and completely out of compliance, essentially being old school type drug dealers. So, and a lot of that has to do with this onerous and burdensome regulatory environment and the incredibly onerous taxes.
I'll say this. I built some financial models for operators in the space, and the tax implication can turn the business plan from profitable to not profitable pretty quick. Yep. There's also IRS regulations around not being able to actually deduct, most of the general costs of bringing this product to market for your federal taxes as well. So like most of the things that you normally would be able to deduct as normal business expenses, you're not able to deduct on your federal taxes, which is just another, it's huge. If you can't deduct your expenses from your revenue and you're paying taxes on it's crazy.
It's no wonder it's such a volatile environment. And really, the only answer to making it fiscally feasible is federal, is a federal law change. Even the states need to be tempered, I think, somewhat in their tax and regulatory oversight.
Some things are it's just insane. It's like clearly, whoever wrote this doesn't have any idea of what it looks like in the physical real world. And on the federal level, you're talking, over 250,000 direct jobs. I think we're, around 500,000 jobs in total that are directly, already been created by this industry. And we're like,
wow,
it is incredibly early still. You say like 70 to 80% of the cannabis in California is not even in the legal market yet. This isn't slowing down, and I think it's just also solvable. The legislation is sitting there ready to be voted on.
So, we're talking about weed here. So this is a fun topic, man. This sounds like really burdensome, but I think a couple dynamics. One is I see the cannabis industry as a great model for what is necessary in the broader supply chain marketplace because of the accountability, the provenance, and regulatory environment that's required. And technologies like yours and other supply chain technologies, they have to comply with that, and they have to account for that. So I can see this being a great model because we can see, especially after COVID, the broader, the mainstream supply chain going that direction and recognizing the need for that kind of thing. What do you think?
Totally. We can do a recall in like 2 clicks and figure out where everything went.
Wow.
Like you think about in agriculture, what was it? The latest thing they were recalling this last week or so was like onions, right? Like dozens of people died because onions had salmonella in them, right? And then it takes the process to do that recall is weeks on end. If it even actually ever happens, by the time you've recalled it, the onions are no longer good.
Right. Or they've already been down, right?
The shelf life is already there. Right. And, from a safety perspective, it's pretty incredible. From a visibility perspective, having, like what other industry do people sometimes like have vertical integration to the degree that they produce the raw materials and sell it to the retail consumer, with transformations in between. That's pretty cool to have. We're doing a lot of work in cannabis and in hemp, really connecting farmers with like the midstream extractors and distributors, and sort of we call it like a partner farmer model, where you're bringing some level of light technology into the farms and giving them like direct connection to ultimately is how they make money, which is getting their product into the market and consolidating that into a single point and then manufacture. I think that's really, really impactful and powerful. And people talk about like vendor linking and having visibility to what is coming and clear communication and master data like shared between companies. There's a lot of good models here on how that's working. There's still a lot of things to work through, but it's there's a lot that's parallel.
Man, so all right, so we need to shift gears here in a second, but I gotta know. Tell me something misunderstood or even mythical that people think about the cannabis industry that you know better.
Well, let's do 2 things. One, I think people think that folks are making lots of money. That is the case for some people, but like we just talked about all those challenges. It's a long journey to get there. When you're there, it's there in a big way. But, I think people think that it's like, oh yeah, let's just grow some weed and sell it. And realize that journey is a lot larger than it is. And I think people have also, the other thing I would say is, I don't know if this is across the board and, being in the industry long enough, like it's not something I think about or hear about that much, but I think people have a perception of, who it is in the industry running the companies and putting the capital in and running these operations. And I will say that like, whatever you're envisioning, what your operator looks like, there's probably 20 other personalities that look completely opposite it that are in the industry. It really is an incredible diverse like background and, and look and culture and, sort of makeup of people. Diversity is something I think the can industry is working on in general, but like it's everything from folks that have been growing for 30 plus years and, keeping all of us happy with, the legacy market weed to folks that have like really, corporate backgrounds that just love to operate and love what they're doing. It's like this really diverse set of operators.
Yeah, it is. And, at MJ BizCon, we had a meeting, a board meeting in Vegas at the same time as MJ BizCon. And I went to that conference expecting one thing and getting something dramatically different. There were all the typical things you would expect, right? But there were also my grandmother I mean,
Yeah.
there were ladies who could have been my grandmother there who were clearly strongly understanding the marketplace. I mean, they were driving the conversations with, various of the presenters and booth holders there. So it was an awakening. I mean, when you walked in the front of the thing, there was an extractor device that looked like a small factory right inside the front door. I mean, I was not expecting that. And it was really interesting to see how there's such a plethora of approaches to the market, from the very most basic, exactly what you'd expect. A guy named Steve in dreadlocks and a tie-dyed t-shirt, and a guy named Winthorpe in a double-breasted suit standing next to $62,000 worth of steel, right? It was just unbelievable what you saw there.
I think there's lots of stereotypes to be broken. And, I've also appreciated, given that we work really coast to coast, how much like regional and cultural, deepness there is in the industry and passion. And, everybody uses cannabis at some point or another. I mean, not everybody, but more people than they probably admit, even. And it's, if you haven't been into a retail store in a legal market, I think you'd be really surprised about how much product diversity there is and quality of product and, ways like in which you can consume it that, maybe could replace a lot of the Ambien and pain pills and add like lots of stuff that, like people I think are starting to incorporate into their day to day. I mean, I have people like from across the age and income and race and, backgrounds, like of all sorts of backgrounds that, I mean, some of them, it's just really amazing to see how much cannabis cuts across every aspect of society. So, yeah,
I think that's a really good point. And also the uses and the way you can administer it. I mean, I think gummies are by far the most popular way to ingest it, correct?
Ooh, I'm not going to quote myself on a number on sales. I mean, I think sales flower, like, which is, just bud, I think still tops.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a whole edibles category in the vape. I have to give Pulp some reports. But yeah, the gummies, I mean, there's some good gummy companies out there. I mean, but like, there's like inhalers and powders and sublinguals and tinctures that you drop on your tongue, and there's even like suppositories and creams, lotions. I mean, it's transdermal patches, drinks that are infused. It's pretty incredible. And also, I would say the other thing is that, like, if people think they have like cannabis all figured out, I'd say the science is far from that. I mean, the science behind the plant, the consistency, and how it interacts with the human body has been, so limited. There's not federal funding for this, like everything else.
Right.
Like, how many tens of millions of dollars we spend just to grow a better, piece of corn, right? Or like any crop you can think of that has, millions and millions and millions of dollars of federal research money poured into state universities that have, entire departments that sit there and study the soybean, production.
Right.
Cannabis has had none of that. And so, the science around what you can do with the plant is really, really early. And so, just figuring that out is, we're still like years away from really getting there.
Yeah, I think that it's really, I think that's a good observation in terms of the uniquenesses or even the myths around this industry. It's just not what you think it is, right? It's not. It's like anything you look at from the outside in, right? It looks a lot different. So, all right. So let's shift gears a little bit. So I'd like some of our founders to be able to take away something that, obviously you've given them a ton, but I would love for them to be able to take away some learnings that you've had. So, if there was anything you know now that you wish you would have known then, what is that?
Test everything, not just from a product testing, but your ideas. I mean, you can't make assumptions. I think if you do two things, one, if you focus on making sure that your team is taken care of and all aligned, and two, that you're solving real problems for your customer, and not just problems for your customer, but problems your customer is willing to pay for. And that should be something that's like the first thing you test. Like, so basically, every decision you're making, like needs to, I just learned this lesson the hard way. And, which was like, cool, we're solving problems. We know we're solving problems. We know this like fits in. We know this XYZ, you push this button, this happens. But like, is that something someone's willing to pay for? And just because they say they're willing to pay for it,
yeah,
not real until the money is in the bank. So like that's the, you see and you hear so many awesome ideas, and ideas are great. I mean, that's what happens. But until someone's willing to, take some of their hard-earned money and hand it to you in return for using that service or getting that product, I mean, it's just an idea, or it's just an intellectual exercise or a project. So that's the biggest thing, is that, has to be tied to that.
How do you think you get them over? How do you think you get a potential customer from the point of saying they'll pay for it? I mean, do you know what the trigger point is that says, okay, they said they'll pay for it, but I know they will? What have you discovered there?
Send them that invoice and get it signed. I mean, it really is like, it's, and like even people that are customers, you go through and like, oh, this and this and this, and then they send them an invoice until it goes through that process and it's signed, even if it's like signed contingent on delivering, right?
Right.
Until that's signed and it's committed, it's just a discussion. I think it's very easy, we still do this. I mean, everybody in business is doing this, right? Like you're going to win this deal. They've committed to it. The need's there. Like you have the great relationship. It's all there. And then something doesn't happen until it's actually there. It's not there. So if you don't have confidence to send someone an invoice for what you're doing, you might need to rethink about what you're doing. Because that's also the thing it's not comfortable to ask people for money. I don't think for some people it is, but you have to be able to talk money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You gotta get there. And that's, I think I didn't come from sales. I have an engineering degree and worked in services. Like it wasn't like I was negotiating a contract, right? I mean, not earlier in my career. You got to be able to talk money with folks and feel comfortable having the discussion and being like, this is what, you have to advocate for it, because they're not going to.
This is what it takes, right? I mean, this is what it takes to get the solution you want, right? Yeah, that is really, really good advice, because I think a lot of us, I think myself included, I've fallen for it too. You're very disciplined, right? When you've just been burned or something like that, and you're like, okay, invoice goes out, or this contract is signed at least, and the terms and a down payment or whatever you want to call it, right? An earnest payment or whatever, before we do any work. And then there's always that one deal where you go, this just feels right. And almost 100% of the time you are wrong. So yeah, that's a really good point. When somebody is willing to pay for it, is when they will pay the invoice, right? Almost on spec. I mean, you almost have to do it that way.
And you get creative with it, but you gotta do that early too. I mean, you just have to, and it's, does anyone want to spend more money than they have on anything? No, but like that is ultimately in business, the value has to be attached to it, and you gotta have that conversation.
Man, that's good advice, and it's a conversation we all need to have and hear more often. We need to just put this segment on a loop, right? Sure, they want it until they have to pay for it, right? So, all right. So let me get a little bit more philosophical on you, man. So tell me right now, kind of what you're, what you're really, really at peace with, or curious, or even concerned about. Just philosophically. It doesn't even have to be with work.
So I guess I'm at peace with sort of my physical health, the mental health, and balance somehow between.
That's good in these times, man. Yeah.
Which is not always the case, but I feel like it's taken a lot of time to get there. But I feel good on a personal level, just about where I sit. Feel really uneasy about where things are headed on a macro level, and just I have gotten some travel in, some little vacations, some business development, in 4 or 5 states over the last 7 weeks. And I've seen a lot of small businesses and talked to a lot of folks about it. And, we're in an industry that's persevering really well through this whole situation, but it is insane to see how decimated small business is in a lot of sectors in entertainment, food, and services, and like how disconnected that is from the market. And like, it just doesn't feel good. So that combined with
it is concerning.
I think we're sort of in the midst of, like, I would say, a global sort of awakening around, and it's probably because I work in cannabis that we talk about these things, but, around like, awareness and connection and being in tune with the environment and having, I don't know, some really good understanding of how we all relate. But on the flip side of that, looking at how things travel through social media and like the misinformation or the deliberate sowing of division in our discourse and like everything, right? Like things that are not controversial becoming controversial. Things are like, and being totally hijacked by people that are in government and, other forces that are stirring the pot. And how blind some people are to the fact that it's just happening. I mean, it's just like, I love being connected on social media, but it's scary when you see, people sharing or talking about things that are just so like disconnected from reality, and people that just can't even have a conversation about topics because they're so divided and about things that are not. I mean, there are certain things as facts, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what is probably most concerning right now is just the turmoil we're having. And I don't know, I'll say it, looking for some leadership to actually provide some message to that is a message of any semblance of unity or vision for a society that looks, safer and more stable and more prosperous, and also in tune with the fact that we're, not systematically destroying every ecosystem and natural system in the planet, which, like we are. Whether or not we want to admit it, you can't cut down 96% of the forest and think that it's all healthy.
Right.
Or dump, millions of pounds of garbage into the ocean and think that have an impact. Or, it's just insane that we're even discussing rolling back, progress that has been sort of incrementally made across the country, and just conveniently ignoring the really deep impact we have on the world around us. So
is there anything we haven't? Well, let me start. Let me go back. Do you see any disconnect, because you've been physically traveling the country, between what's presented in terms of division in society and what you actually see in terms of division?
I think you get everybody in the room. We're all good. I mean, you don't see people throwing fights and saying things like they do or online. I think we just need to pick up the phone and talk to each other a little bit more. It's really easy to lob, comments and questions, from, behind your computer or behind your phone. But, it's like when people get in the same room, I mean, we're all kind of wanting the same things out of life, and we're not that far off. I mean, and I think that's just really important. So I don't think people are going to pick up their guns and start, attacking each other anytime soon or something like that, but like clearly there's a lot of things that are really wrong with what's happening in the world. And we saw massive social upright, like demonstrations in every city of any size across the entire country, for, weeks on end. It doesn't just happen out of nowhere. And it's a pretty broad-based movement, whether or not you agree on certain solutions of it, it doesn't. I think it's pretty broadly, recognized that there are big problems that need to be solved. A lot of ways to solve them. There's not one silver bullet, but there's a lot. I think there's a lot more that unites us than divides us at the end of the day.
Awesome. All right. So just one final question: what would you like to share with our audience that maybe I haven't asked you about, or we haven't talked about?
What would I like to share? I would say that, don't be afraid to dive in and try something new during this pandemic. And if you have a passion for something, pursue it. I mean, we're still, I think, despite everything that's going on in the world, like it's just still a really amazing opportunity. It's so easy to go and just execute on your dreams right now. It's never easy to get there, but there's lots of tools and resources and people and capital out there. I still feel like, being in the States, we're in the richest country in the world. There's more capital than people know what to do with. I mean, I think that if you want to be in the startup world, I mean, call it a startup, recognize it's a business. It takes a lot of work to make it all happen, and pursue it. Just because things seem shaky on the macro world doesn't mean there's not lots of problems to be solved still, and there's not resources there to do it. In fact, sometimes there's a good opportunity to do that reset.
That's a really good point. I mean, somebody is making money in every market, regardless of what the macro conditions are, right?
Yes.
You just got to find a problem that you can solve there. That's a good heads up. I think the other thing, I do this sometimes. I identify people's superpowers. Your superpower is, as kind of what I was talking about before, you like to eliminate every opportunity to lose. You like to, as you said, plan for and understand the worst and figure that could happen and figure out how to manage that. And I think if you want to recognize those dreams, you've got to be realistic and mature enough to do that, to recognize that it won't always be, right, sunshine. There will be clouds, there will be rain, there will be thunderstorms, there will be a flood, right? There might even be a fire-nado in this day and age, right? But if you understand what those possibilities are and you build contingency plans like you do and you communicate that to your team, that is a great, that's a harbinger of success. It helps boost your ability to recognize your dreams. So I appreciate you sharing all that with us, Colton. Man, that is good stuff. We haven't gotten to have this discussion too much. I mean, we've had kind of discussions around this, but we haven't had this concentrated time about kind of what you think and how you've dealt with things and how you deal with them today. So I really appreciate you doing that.
Appreciate it. And, at the end of the day, it's not just about one person, it's about the team. I'll say that as well. I guess as a final word is, you can only carry yourself so far, but it is the team that you put around yourself that truly gets there at the end of the day. So we're all dealing with people at the end of the day. So,
amen.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Big thanks to you, Colton, CEO and co-founder of Flourish Software. My friend, great philosopher, great business person, making things happen. Look, if you can connect with Colton, I'm sure you can connect with him on LinkedIn, right?
Mm-hmm.
flourishsoftware.com.
Got it.
Yeah. Reach out. He may not be as active on Twitter, I think we just learned. So, but
I still have it. So
okay.
Finally Flourish on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and then Colton Griffin on Twitter as well. I'm pretty easy to find if you search.
Cool. All right. Thanks, man.
All right. That's all you need to know about supply chain tech for this week. Don't forget to get to supplychainnowradio.com for more Supply Chain Now series, interviews, and events. And now we have 2 live streams per week. The most popular live show in supply chain, Supply Chain Buzz, every Monday at noon Eastern Time with Scott Luton, the master, and me. Plus, our Thursday live stream, to be named later, where we bring you whatever the hell we want. Like a few weeks ago when we interviewed our producer Clay, the dog, Phillips. Thanks for spending your valuable time with me, and remember, acknowledge reality, but never be bound by it.